I want to tell you about something that happened in my life, something that took me years to find the words for and even longer to understand. It's about survival, I suppose, but not the kind you see in movies. It's messier than that. It's about the choices we make when we think we have none, and the price our children pay for our silence. I'm sitting here today because I finally learned that shame loses its power when you speak it out loud. My name is Catherine O'Brien. I'm 71 years old now, and this scar on my face, you've probably noticed it, tells only a fraction of the story. But let me start at the beginning, back when I was young and foolish enough to believe that love could conquer tradition, that my own worth didn't depend on the gender of the children I might bear. I met Patrick O'Brien in 1974 at a church social. He was handsome in that dark Irish way, with thick black hair and blue eyes that crinkled when he smiled. He worked at the steel mill like his father before him, and he had that rough-handed gentleness that made me feel protected. We courted for 8 months before he proposed, and I said yes without hesitation. I was 21 years old, and I thought I knew everything about love. I knew nothing about power, about how a family's expectations could crush a marriage like a vice. Patrick's father, old Mr. O'Brien, we never called him anything else, never used his first name, was a towering figure in their household. He'd immigrated from County Cork in 1948 with nothing but a cardboard suitcase and a head full of old country ideas. By 1975, he owned a small construction business and 3 rental properties. He'd built something from nothing, and he intended that something to pass to his sons and then to his grandsons. The family name he'd say over Sunday dinners was sacred. The O'Brien line had to continue. We married in June of 1975 at St. Michael's Catholic Church. The reception was held in the church basement, with folding tables covered in white paper tablecloths and bowls of potato salad that the church ladies had made. Old Mr. O'Brien gave a toast that night. I remember standing there in my borrowed wedding dress, my mother's dress taken in at the waist, listening to him talk about grandchildren. Not children, specifically, grandsons. He raised his glass and said, "To the future O'Brien boys." Everyone laughed and clinked their glasses. Patrick squeezed my hand. I smiled, but something cold settled in my stomach. The first year of marriage was happy enough. We rented a small apartment above a bakery on Maple Street. The smell of fresh bread would wake us each morning. Patrick worked long hours at the mill, coming home with steel dust in his hair and grease under his fingernails. I worked at the textile factory on the edge of town, running a sewing machine 8 hours a day until my back ached. We were saving for a house, Patrick said. A house with a yard for the boys to play in. I got pregnant in the fall of 1975. Patrick was overjoyed. Old Mr. O'Brien bought us a blue crib before I was even showing. His wife, a quiet woman who rarely spoke above a whisper, knitted blue booties and blue blankets. When I suggested maybe buying something yellow or green just in case, Patrick's mother looked at me with confusion. "But it's a boy," she said, as if this were a fact already determined by God himself. Mary was born on a rainy Tuesday in April 1976. 10 hours of labor, and when the nurse finally laid her in my arms, I fell in love so completely that I forgot to be afraid. She was perfect, tiny and red-faced, with a shock of dark hair just like Patrick's. I counted her fingers, her toes, breathed in that newborn smell that's like nothing else in the world. Patrick came into the delivery room an hour later. I watched his face as the nurse said, "Congratulations, you have a beautiful daughter." His smile faltered for just a moment, so brief that if I hadn't been watching so carefully, I might have missed it. Then he recovered, came over, kissed my forehead. "She's beautiful, Catherine," he said. And he meant it. I know he did, but there was something else in his voice, something uncertain. Old Mr. O'Brien came to the hospital that evening. He stood at the foot of my bed, looking down at Mary in her plastic bassinet. He didn't pick her up, didn't coo over her the way my own father had done. He just stood there, his face carved from granite, and said, "Well, the next one will be a boy." Then he left. Patrick and I brought Mary home to our little apartment. For a while, things were good. Patrick was a gentle father in those early days. He'd walk Mary around the apartment at night when she cried, singing Irish lullabies in his rough voice. But Sunday dinners at his parents' house became harder. Old Mr. O'Brien would barely acknowledge Mary's existence. He'd ask Patrick about work, about the house we were saving for, about the boys, as if they already existed somewhere, waiting to be born. I got pregnant again in early 1978. This time there was more pressure, though nobody said it directly. Patrick's mother would pat my growing belly and say things like, "I'm praying for you." The church ladies would whisper and nod knowingly. Someone gave us a toy truck at the baby shower, and when I laughed and said we didn't know if it was a boy yet, the room went quiet. Eileen was born in October 1978. Another girl, another perfect, beautiful daughter. The nurse's words, "It's a girl," hit me like a physical blow, not because I wasn't happy, but because I knew what it meant. Patrick didn't come to the delivery room at all. He was in the waiting room, and when the nurse told him, he left, just walked out of the hospital and drove to Sullivan's Bar on 5th Street. He came home at 3 in the morning, drunk enough to stumble. I was in bed, still sore from the delivery, Eileen sleeping in a cradle beside me. Patrick stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the hallway light, and said, "Another girl, Catherine." Jesus Christ. Then he went to sleep on the couch. Old Mr. O'Brien didn't come to the hospital at all this time. When we finally brought Eileen home, he came over once, looked at her with barely concealed disappointment, and left after 10 minutes. The dynamic in our house began to shift after Eileen's birth. Patrick started drinking more. Not every night at first, just Fridays after work, then Fridays and Saturdays, then whenever the mood struck him. He'd come home late, smelling of whiskey and cigarettes, and he'd be angry about small things. Dinner not ready, the apartment messy, Mary crying. The warmth between us turned cold. We stopped talking about dreams, about the future. We stopped talking much at all. Old Mr. O'Brien got worse. He'd make comments at Sunday dinner, always when Patrick could hear. "Shame about the girls," he'd say, carving the roast beef. "The O'Brien name dies with Patrick now, I suppose." Or he'd talk about his friend whose daughter-in-law had just given birth to twin boys. "Now that's a blessing," he'd say, looking pointedly at me. "Some women know how to give their husbands what they need." I tried to be invisible at those dinners. I'd keep my head down, focus on cutting Mary's meat into small pieces, making sure Eileen didn't spill her milk. But I felt every comment like a knife. And worse, I saw Patrick absorbing his father's disappointment, letting it ferment into his own resentment. By 1981, we'd moved into a small house on Oak Street. Patrick had been promoted to shift supervisor at the mill, and old Mr. O'Brien had helped with the down payment, though he made sure we understood it was a loan to be repaid with interest. The house had 3 bedrooms and a small backyard with an oak tree. Mary was 5, Eileen was 3. I'd quit the textile factory to stay home with them. We should have been happy, but Patrick was drinking heavily now, most nights. He'd sit in front of the television with a 6-pack of beer, getting progressively angrier as the evening wore on. Sometimes he'd rant about work, about his boss, about money, but often, especially after he'd been to his parents' house, he'd rant about our daughters. 3 bedrooms, he'd say bitterly. We have 3 bedrooms for boys, and what do we have? Girls who'll just grow up and take some other man's name. I got pregnant for the 3rd time in late 1981. I was terrified. The pregnancy felt different, heavier, more ominous. Everyone's expectations pressed down on me like a physical weight. Patrick's mother took me to church every Sunday to pray the rosary specifically for a boy. She'd make me kneel at the altar of St. Gerard, the patron saint of motherhood, and we'd pray until my knees ached on the hard wood. Old Mr. O'Brien had opinions about everything I ate, everything I did. He brought me strange herbal supplements from a Chinese shop in the city, claiming they would ensure a male child. He had theories about conception times, moon phases, dietary restrictions. Patrick's mother would make me eat certain foods, lots of red meat, salty things, because someone told her it would help. I felt like a brood mare being prepared for breeding. The entire pregnancy, I lived with a sense of doom. I'd wake up at night, my hands on my belly, and whisper to the baby inside me, "Please be a boy. Please, I don't care if you're healthy, if you're happy, just please be a boy." I'm ashamed of those prayers now. What kind of mother prays for her child to be something other than what they are? Bridget was born on a cold February morning in 1982. The labor was hard, 12 hours of it, and when it was finally over, when the nurse said, "It's a girl," I started crying. Not tears of joy, tears of absolute terror. Patrick was in the waiting room. When the nurse told him, he didn't walk out this time. He stood up very slowly, and I heard him through the door. He didn't yell, he just said, "Jesus Christ," very quietly. Then he asked if I was okay. The nurse said yes. He said, "Tell her I'll be back later," and he left. He didn't come back to the hospital at all during my 3-day stay. His mother came once, held Bridget for maybe 5 minutes without saying a word, then left. Old Mr. O'Brien didn't come at all. When I brought Bridget home, carrying her in my arms with Mary and Eileen walking beside me, Patrick was sitting in the living room with a bottle of whiskey. It was 11 in the morning. He looked at Bridget, looked at me, and said, "3 strikes, Catherine. 3 fucking strikes." That's when everything truly fell apart. Patrick's drinking became constant. He'd start in the morning before work, drink through his lunch break, come home drunk at night. He started missing shifts at the mill. His supervisor called the house once, and I made excuses, said he had the flu, but we both knew. The violence started small. Patrick would slam things, cabinet doors, his fist on the table. He broke dishes accidentally. He'd grab my arm hard enough to leave bruises, then apologize the next day when he was sober. I told myself it wasn't real violence. Not yet. Old Mr. O'Brien came over one Sunday afternoon when Patrick was passed out upstairs. He sat at our kitchen table while I made tea, and he said, "You know, Catherine, in the old country, a woman who couldn't give her husband sons was sent back to her family. She'd failed in her primary duty." I stood at the counter, my back to him, holding the kettle with shaking hands. "Patrick is my only son," he continued, "the only one who can carry on the O'Brien name. And you've given him nothing but daughters, 3 daughters who'll grow up, get married, and become someone else's responsibility." I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to throw the boiling kettle in his face. Instead, I said nothing. I just stood there because I'd learned by then that silence was survival. He stood up to leave. At the door, he said, "My son deserves better. He should find a woman who can give him what he needs." Then he left. That conversation haunted me. I started to believe him. I'd look at my daughters and think, he's right. I failed. When Mary would climb into my lap and hug me, I'd feel guilty, as if loving her was somehow a betrayal of my marriage, of my duty. The first time Patrick really hit me was in August 1982. Bridget was 6 months old and crying with an ear infection. It was past midnight. Patrick had been at Sullivan's bar and came home drunk. Mary was 7 and Eileen was almost 4. They were asleep upstairs. Patrick stumbled into the house and started yelling about the noise. I was walking Bridget in the living room trying to soothe her, and I asked him to please be quiet, the girls were sleeping. "The girls," he spat. "Always the girls. 3 girls, Catherine. 3 exclamation mark. He grabbed the ceramic vase from the mantel, my grandmother's vase, and threw it against the wall. It shattered. Bridget screamed louder. "What is wrong with you?" he shouted. "Why couldn't you give me sons?" Just one boy." I tried to walk past him to take Bridget upstairs away from the noise. He grabbed my arm and spun me around. Bridget nearly fell from my arms. I clutched her tighter. "Let go," I said. "You're scaring the baby." "I don't give a damn about the baby," he shouted. "Another girl. Another useless girl." That's when I saw them, Mary and Eileen at the top of the stairs. They were in their nightgowns, standing side by side, holding hands. Mary's eyes were wide with terror. Patrick saw me looking and turned. For a moment, I thought seeing his daughters there might stop him. Instead, he turned back to me and slapped me across the face, hard enough that I staggered, hard enough that I tasted blood. Mary screamed. Eileen started crying. Bridget wailed in my arms. I don't remember much of the rest of that night. Patrick stormed out. I sat on the floor with Bridget, my cheek throbbing. Mary came down the stairs, my brave, protective Mary, and she sat beside me and put her small arms around me. Eileen hovered nearby, crying, not understanding. "It's okay, Mama," Mary whispered. "It's okay." But it wasn't okay. Nothing was okay. That became the pattern. Patrick would drink, he'd get angry about something. Dinner burned, bills unpaid, the girls too loud, but it always came back to the same thing. I hadn't given him sons. He'd throw things, break things. Sometimes he'd grab me, shake me. Sometimes he'd hit me, and always, always the girls saw it. Mary learned to recognize the signs. When Patrick came home and headed straight for the liquor cabinet, she'd take her sisters upstairs. She'd close their bedroom door and turn on their little radio to drown out the sounds from downstairs. She was 7 years old, taking care of her 4-year-old sister and infant sister, pretending everything was fine while their father destroyed furniture and their mother bled. The worst incident was in November 1983. Patrick had been let go from the mill. Too many missed shifts, too many times showing up drunk. He blamed me, of course. If I'd given him sons, he said, he wouldn't be so stressed. He wouldn't drink so much. He came home one night absolutely raging. I don't even remember what set him off specifically. Maybe nothing. Maybe just the accumulated disappointment of his life. He started throwing things, chairs, the coffee table, picture frames, glass everywhere. Mary was 8, Eileen was 5, Bridget was almost 2. I tried to get the girls out of the house. I grabbed Bridget and told Mary to take Eileen's hand and go next door to Mrs. Henderson's house, but Patrick blocked the door. "Nobody's going anywhere," he said. His voice was quiet, which was somehow more terrifying than when he yelled. "Patrick, please," I said. "You're scaring them." "Good," he said. "Maybe they should be scared. Maybe they should know what it's like to disappoint people." Mary, my brave girl, stepped forward. She was so small, barely came up to her father's waist, but she looked up at him with those fierce green eyes and said, "Don't hurt my mom." Patrick stared at her. For a moment I prayed, that seeing his daughter's courage might reach something human in him. Instead, he said, "Get out of my way." And when Mary didn't move, he shoved her. Not hard. He barely touched her, really, but Mary stumbled backward and her head hit the corner of the side table. The sound, I'll never forget that sound. A dull thunk. Then Mary on the floor, blood seeping from her scalp. Eileen started screaming. Bridget was crying in my arms. And Patrick just stood there looking at what he'd done, his face slack with shock. Mrs. Henderson heard the screaming and called the police. They came, and an ambulance. Mary had a concussion and needed 6 stitches. At the hospital, a young nurse took me aside and asked if I was safe at home. I lied. I said it was an accident, that Mary had fallen. The nurse didn't believe me. I could see it in her eyes. But what could she do? Patrick was arrested that night for drunk and disorderly conduct. Old Mr. O'Brien bailed him out the next morning and brought him home. The first thing Patrick said to me was, "If you'd given me sons, none of this would have happened." I tried to leave after that. I packed bags for myself and the girls while Patrick was at his parents' house. We went to a women's shelter on the other side of town. The woman who ran it, Sister Margaret, was kind. She gave us a small room with 2 twin beds and said we could stay as long as we needed. But the pressure to return was immense. Father O'Connor from our church came to the shelter. He sat across from me in Sister Margaret's small office and told me that marriage was a sacred vow, that divorce was a mortal sin, that a woman's place was with her husband supporting him through difficult times. "Patrick is struggling," Father O'Connor said. "He needs his wife, and your daughters need their father." I wanted to laugh at that. My daughters needed to be safe. They needed not to see their mother beaten. They needed not to cower in their bedroom while their father raged downstairs. But Father O'Connor didn't see it that way. My own parents came. They sat with me in that shelter, and my mother cried. She begged me to think about the girl's future. "A divorced woman," she said. "You'll never get another job. You'll be shunned. And the girls, they'll be marked by this their whole lives. My father, normally a quiet man, said, "You made your bed, Catherine. You chose Patrick. Now you have to lie in it." I stayed at the shelter for 2 weeks, then I went back. What else could I do? It was 1983. I had no job, no money, 3 small children, and no support from anyone except Sister Margaret, who could offer shelter but not salvation. When I returned home, Patrick promised it would be different. He swore he'd stop drinking, he'd go to AA meetings, we'd start over. Old Mr. O'Brien even came over and apologized, not for anything specific, just a vague, "I'm sorry for the troubles." It was different for about 2 months. Patrick stayed sober. He got a new job at a warehouse. He was gentle with the girls, guilty about what he'd done to Mary, but the resentment was still there underneath everything. I could see it in the way he looked at them, at me. We were his failures, his disappointments. By early 1984, he was drinking again. The violence returned, but now it had a pattern. It was almost routine. The girls learned to make themselves scarce. Mary, at 9 years old, had responsibilities no child should have. She'd get her sisters ready for school, make sure they ate breakfast, walk them to the bus stop while I was still in bed nursing bruises. She became a mother to her sisters because I was too broken to be one. The years blurred together. 1984, 1985, 1986. Patrick would have periods of sobriety, then relapse. The violence ebbed and flowed like a terrible tide. I learned to cover bruises with makeup, to lie to doctors about broken ribs and black eyes. The girls learned to be quiet, to be invisible, to survive. I remember Mary's 10th birthday in 1986. I'd saved money secretly to buy her a new dress, something pretty, something bright. When she opened it, she smiled, but her eyes were old, too old for a 10-year-old. She hugged me and whispered, "Thank you, Mama." And I realized she was thanking me not just for the dress, but for trying, for still trying, despite everything. The worst part wasn't the physical pain. The worst part was watching my daughters grow up in that house of fear, watching them learn that love meant violence, that marriage meant suffering, that men couldn't be trusted. I was teaching them through my example that women had to endure, had to stay silent, had to accept their fate. Eileen developed anxiety. She'd chew her nails until they bled. She'd have nightmares and wake up screaming. Bridget became so quiet, unnaturally quiet for a child. She'd sit in corners with her dolls and whisper to them, making up stories where the dolls were brave enough to run away. And Mary, my Mary, carried the weight of us all. She was the protector, the mediator. When Patrick would start to rage, Mary would try to distract him, would offer herself as a target to draw his attention away from me or her sisters. One night when she was 11, Patrick was furious about something I'd said, and Mary deliberately knocked over a glass of milk at dinner. Patrick turned his anger on her instead, screaming about her clumsiness, and she just sat there and took it, her eyes meeting mine across the table. She knew what she was doing. She was 11 years old, and she was sacrificing herself to protect me. After he sent her to bed without dinner, I went upstairs and found her in her room, crying silently into her pillow. I held her and apologized, and she said, "It's okay, Mama. I love you." That's when I knew I was destroying her, not just allowing her to be hurt, but actively teaching her that self-sacrifice and suffering were what love looked like. But I still didn't leave. I was too afraid. Afraid of being alone, of failing, of proving old Mr. O'Brien right that I was useless. Afraid my daughters would hate me for breaking up the family, even though the family was already broken. The years continued. 1987, 1988, 1989. The girls grew older. Mary became quiet and serious, too mature for her age. She stopped having friends over, too embarrassed about what they might see or hear. Eileen developed stomach problems from stress. Bridget started having panic attacks in elementary school. I tried to make up for it in small ways. I'd read to them at night, bake their favorite cookies, help with homework. But nothing I did could erase what they witnessed, what they lived through. I was their mother, and I was failing them. In 1990, old Mr. O'Brien died of a heart attack. At the funeral, I felt nothing. This man who had poisoned my marriage, who had told his son that I was worthless for not producing grandsons, I felt nothing for him. Patrick cried at the grave. Later that night, he got drunk and hit me because his father was dead and he needed someone to blame. The pattern continued into the 1990s. Patrick's drinking worsened. He lost job after job. We were broke most of the time, relying on my part-time work at a grocery store and whatever money Patrick could scrape together from odd jobs. The violence was constant now, almost casual. A slap here, a shove there, sometimes worse. Mary turned 16 in 1992. She'd grown into a beautiful young woman, tall and serious with her father's dark hair and my green eyes. She had excellent grades and a scholarship to the state university, but she told me she wasn't going. She couldn't leave her sisters alone with Patrick and me. I begged her to go. I told her she'd earned it, that she deserved to have a life, but she refused. How can I leave? She asked me. Who will protect them? The fact that my 16-year-old daughter thought she needed to protect her family from her own father, that was when I knew how completely I'd failed. Eileen was 14 and Bridget was 10. They were good girls despite everything. Smart, kind, resilient in ways children shouldn't have to be, but they were damaged. I could see it. Eileen flinched at loud noises. Bridget had developed a stutter. And Mary had stopped smiling altogether. I tried one more time to leave in 1994. I'd been secretly saving money for 2 years, hiding it in a coffee can in the garage. I had almost $800. I thought it would be enough to get us somewhere, start over. I told the girls we were leaving. We packed bags in the middle of the night while Patrick was passed out drunk. Mary was 18, Eileen 16, Bridget 12, old enough to understand, to help. We were quiet, efficient. We'd practiced this in our minds so many times. We got as far as the bus station, bought tickets to my sister's house 3 states away. We were sitting on the bench waiting for the 6 a.m. bus when Patrick found us. He'd woken up, found us gone, and somehow figured out where we'd gone. He came into the bus station like a hurricane, drunk and furious. He grabbed me by the arm and dragged me outside. The girls followed, crying, pleading. In the parking lot, Patrick hit me harder than he ever had before. I fell to the pavement. He kicked me in the ribs. Mary threw herself over me, trying to shield me with her body. Patrick pulled her off, and she hit her head on a car bumper. Someone had called the police. They came and arrested Patrick. I was taken to the hospital with broken ribs and a fractured eye socket. Mary had a concussion, her second because of her father. The police took statements. A sympathetic officer encouraged me to press charges. I did. For the first time in 20 years of marriage, I pressed charges against my husband. Patrick was held for 3 days, then released on bail. Old Mr. O'Brien was dead, but Patrick's mother paid it. The trial was in August 1994. I testified about the years of abuse. My daughters testified about what they'd witnessed. The prosecutor showed photos of my injuries, medical records going back years. Patrick's lawyer painted me as an unstable woman, a bad mother who'd turned her daughters against their father. He brought up the fact that I'd tried to leave multiple times, suggesting I was manipulative and vindictive. Patrick was convicted of assault and sentenced to 6 months in jail and mandatory anger management classes. 6 months for 20 years of terror. When the judge read the sentence, I felt nothing. No relief, no satisfaction, just emptiness. Patrick got out in 4 months for good behavior. His mother helped him get an apartment across town. The judge granted me a restraining order. For the first time since 1975, I lived in a house without violence. But the damage was done. Mary refused to go to college even though she still had her scholarship. She got a job at the grocery store with me, saying she needed to help with money. Eileen had developed an eating disorder and was dangerously thin. Bridget had such severe anxiety that she could barely go to school. I tried to make it up to them. I went to therapy. I encouraged them to go too. Mary went a few times but stopped. Eileen went regularly, which helped some. Bridget refused. Patrick stayed away mostly. The restraining order kept him at a distance. He'd call sometimes, drunk, leaving rambling messages about how I'd ruined his life, how if I'd just given him sons, everything would have been different. I stopped listening to the messages. Then in July 1995, we got a call from the police. Patrick had been in a car accident. He'd been driving drunk, ran a red light, hit a semi-truck. He died instantly. The officer who came to tell me was young, apologetic. He asked if I needed to sit down. I was standing in the kitchen, had been making dinner. The girls were in the living room watching TV. I heard what he said, and my very first thought was, thank God. Not sadness, not grief, relief. I told the girls. Mary nodded slowly. Eileen started crying, though I don't think she knew why. Bridget, 14 years old, said, "Does this mean he can't come back?" "Yes," I told her, "he can't come back." We didn't go to the funeral. Patrick's mother called me, hysterical, calling me ungrateful and cruel. She said I'd driven her son to this, that my failure as a wife had killed him. I listened to her rant, then hung up. I never spoke to her again. In the days after Patrick's death, I waited for grief to come. It never did. What came instead was a crushing wave of guilt, not for Patrick, but for my daughters. I'd wasted 20 years. 20 years I could have protected them, given them a safe home, shown them what strength looked like. Instead, I'd taught them to endure, to stay silent, to accept suffering. Mary was 20 when Patrick died. She never dated, never brought anyone home. When I asked her about it once, she said, "I don't trust men, Mama. I don't know how." Eileen was 18. She'd gotten into college but deferred, saying she wasn't ready. She worked at a bookstore and saw her therapist twice a week. She told me once that she couldn't imagine getting married, having children, because what if she repeated the cycle? What if she chose a man like Patrick? Bridget was 14, still struggling with anxiety and nightmares. She'd wake up screaming sometimes, thinking she heard her father downstairs breaking things. I'd hold her and remind her he was gone, but the fear was bone deep. I look at my daughters now, and I see strong, compassionate, incredible women. Mary became a social worker. She works at a women's shelter helping victims of domestic violence. She told me once that she became a social worker because she wished someone had helped us, really helped us. She's dedicated her life to being the person we needed. Eileen is a teacher. She's been teaching high school English for 15 years now. She's passionate about her students, especially the troubled ones, the ones from difficult homes. She's also involved in several anti-domestic violence organizations. She speaks at schools about recognizing abuse, about getting help. Bridget is a therapist specializing in childhood trauma. She has a small practice and she's helped dozens of children who've witnessed domestic violence. She told me that understanding her own trauma helped her understand how to help others heal from theirs. I'm proud of them, incredibly proud. They've taken their pain and turned it into purpose, but none of them have married, none of them have children. Mary is 49 now, Eileen is 47, Bridget is 43. When I ask them about it, gently, carefully, they all say versions of the same thing. They're still healing. They're still learning to trust. They're still recovering from childhood spent in fear. That's my deepest regret. Not the years I suffered. I made my choices, however constrained they were, but I robbed my daughters of their childhoods. I taught them that love looks like violence, that family means fear, that women have no power. I let them watch their father hurt their mother for years and years, and that violence shaped who they became. I volunteer now at the same shelter Sister Margaret ran, though she's long since passed. I sit with women who are where I was, terrified, trapped, making excuses. I tell them my story. I show them my scar, this one on my face, from the last time Patrick hit me before I finally pressed charges. I tell them that staying doesn't protect your children. It teaches them that abuse is normal. Some of them listen, some of them leave, some of them go back, just like I did, over and over. I don't judge them, I understand, but I encourage them every time to think about what they're teaching their children by staying. This scar on my face, I never had it fixed, though doctors said they could make it less visible. I keep it because it reminds me. It reminds me that I survived. It reminds me that silence is not strength, that endurance is not virtue. It reminds me that the hardest thing I ever did was finally say no, finally say enough, finally choose my daughters over my marriage. I wish I'd done it sooner. I wish I'd been braver. I wish I'd left the first time Patrick hit me, or the 10th time, or the 100th. I wish my daughters had grown up in a house filled with peace instead of fear. I wish I'd shown them that women are strong, that we don't have to accept cruelty in the name of tradition or duty or love. But I can't change the past. All I can do is sit here in this library, in this town where everyone knows my story, and tell it to anyone who'll listen. I tell it because shame thrives in silence and dies in the light. I tell it because maybe some young woman will hear it and recognize her own life in mine, and she'll leave before her daughters learn what mine learned. I tell it because my daughters asked me to. Mary said, "Tell the story, Mama. Tell it so other women know they're not alone." Eileen said, "Tell it so people understand what domestic violence does to children, not just to wives." Bridget said, "Tell it because healing starts with truth." So here's my truth. I stayed too long. I believed lies about duty and shame and my own worthlessness. I let my daughters witness violence because I was too afraid to leave, and they paid the price for my fear. But here's also my truth. I survived. My daughters survived. We're all still here, still fighting, still trying to heal. The O'Brien name that Patrick's father was so desperate to preserve, it ends with Patrick. None of my daughters took their father's name when they grew up. They all kept O'Brien, but they redefined what it means. In our family now, O'Brien doesn't mean violence and tradition and shame. It means survival. It means strength. It means breaking cycles. I'm 71 years old. I have this scar on my face and scars all over my body and scars even deeper that no one can see. But I'm here. I'm sitting in this library drinking coffee, telling my story. And my daughters are out there in the world, helping people, healing people, being the kind of strong women I wish I'd been when they were young. That's not redemption. Exactly. You can't redeem failing your children, but maybe it's something. Maybe it's enough.